morning, or afternoon, evening, whenever you decide to watch this video. Let's talk about some maintenance and saving some money, shall we? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to yet another Mountain Vibes episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So today's video, I'm going to be giving you 4 easy tips to help maintain your gear, kind of like help you save money in the long run as well. So without further ado, let's get into this video, shall we? All right, so tip number 1, and that is always wipe down or dry your gear. This won't take very much time at all. Anytime you come back from the mountain, highly suggest you just take like paper towel or a dish rag and just give like your gear a really nice solid wipe down. Biggest reason for this is that any moisture that is actually on your edges, if by chance you have to like throw your stuff directly into storage, all that moisture will eventually cling to those edges and will eventually start forming rust. Against popular belief that these edges are actually not stainless steel, so you just can't, put them away and then hopefully, think that your stuff isn't going to rust at all. So make sure you give it a nice solid wipe down. And then once you've actually wiped down your skis or your board, just let them leave them out to dry just for like maybe an hour or two, just to make sure that there's no more moisture on it. If you do have to throw it into back into its bag or into like a storage area, it'll just end up saving you time in the long run, not having to take your stuff into a shop to get those edges redone, to either to remove the rust or to maintain their sharpness. Now, as well, when it comes to the boots, one thing you can even do is the liners are removable in many ski and snowboard boots these days. So what you could do is take the liner out and just like let them out to dry. Same thing, you can either do it overnight or do it for a couple hours, or you can even like wipe down the inside of the shell just to make sure that you get rid of any sort of moisture that's actually in it. This also helps if you are on a multi-day trip and instead of like putting on like a cold, wet pair of boots the following morning, take the liners out, put them next to a heat source, just not directly on the heat source. You don't want to ruin your liners, and that'll just like dry them out nicely, making sure that you have a nice dry liner for the morning. Because I've done it before, and putting on like a damp pair of boots is really not necessarily the most pleasant feeling in the world. And then throughout the day, when you start with wet feet, your feet will stay wet, you'll get cold, and then you're just gonna be doing that process all over again. And then when it comes to your goggles, make sure that you even dry those out as well. A lot of the foam that's around the face there, if that is actually wet or even damp for that matter, it could cause a lot of condensation. So therefore your goggles will end up fogging a fair bit more. So just make sure that you just dry those off into the kind of same thing. You can put them next to like a heat source if you wanted to, just don't put it too close because, plastic and heat really don't go hand in hand very well. So just take the time to actually make sure that you dry your gear off. It'll save you time and money in the long run to like not having to deal with like maintenance costs or anything like that. All right, so tip number 2, and this kind of like coincides or is a continuation of tip number 1, and that is when your stuff is dry, make sure you actually keep it dry. The last thing you want to do is put it into let's say like a damp basement or a damp garage. Biggest reason for that is there's a lot of moisture, there's a lot of dampness down there. All that dampness will eventually start clinging to your edges, therefore creating a lot of rust, and you're going to lose the sharpness of those edges. And then if you want them removed, you're going to have to take them back into a ski shop and pay to have your edges redone. And especially if you're in a rush or if you're in a bit of a pinch, you decide to go last minute and you realize your stuff's all rusted out, you may not be able to actually get it done, and then therefore you're going to actually be skiing or snowboarding on something with some edges that aren't going to necessarily be super sharp for you. Another thing is that like if you dry your stuff out and you have to leave it in a bag, make sure that the bag itself is actually dry. Make sure there's no moisture in that, because the same thing, the moment you put your ski or your snowboards in there, you zip up the bag, you're locking all that moisture in, and then over time that moisture will evaporate and it will actually start clinging to that metal again. And then same process. Once all that rust starts to form, you're gonna have to take your stuff in and you're gonna have to actually get it all serviced and get all that rust removed to make sure you have nice sharp edges. Now, when it comes to your boots as well, do not leave those in a damp area either. Biggest reason for this is that actually, and I've seen this before, mold can actually grow inside of damp liners. Now, if that happens, you'll have to either A, go get them professionally cleaned, make sure that all that mold is taken out, B, have to go buy new liners, which may actually be a little bit harder or a little bit more expensive than what you're willing to pay, or C, just buy an entirely brand new pair of boots instead, because it may be more cost effective to buy a brand new pair of boots as opposed to buying just the liner for it. So make sure that all your stuff is kept in a nice dry area, because it will eventually save you money and time in the long run. All right, tip number 3, and I'm going to refer to this one as do them up. The thing with this is that pertains more to your boots, and then the reason for this is that especially when it comes to ski boots. If you leave the boots and the buckles undone, over time the plastic will actually start to open up, and then it will actually start to distort the plastic itself, making it harder for you to actually do the boot up. And then as well, the fit may not be the exact same either, because the plastic wants to stay open and it's not going to maintain that tight fit that it once had. So when you get home, once everything's actually nice and dried out, you're going to want to do the boots up lightly. You know, you don't have to crank them down or anything, but just do it enough just to help maintain the shape of the boot. Same thing goes to snowboard boots. You know, the outer shell can eventually start to open up a little bit more, or the tongue can start moving away from the boot, and therefore you're not going to get that nice snug fit up and around like your calf area. And another quick thing when it comes to the snowboarders, just do up the bindings as well. This will do a couple of things. It'll A, maintain the shape, and B, it's just going to make it a lot, you know, you're not going to have to worry about like the bindings snagging on things if they're just like everything stays nice and tight. It's going to, again, maintain a nice proper fit. You're not going to have to do any like sort of adjustments or keep fiddling like with your straps like while you're on the hill. So nice and simple. Just make sure that everything is done up loosely as you're putting it all away. It'll just help more or less maintain the fit and maintain the performance of your gear. All right, so tip number 4, and that is just keep up with general maintenance and repairs. Now, I'm not saying that you actually have to go out and, you know, get your stuff waxed and sharpened every single time you go to the hill, but, you know, give yourself a kind of like a maintenance schedule, so to speak. So let's say every 5-6 times you go out on the mountain, you take your stuff in, and you just get it like serviced. You get it waxed or you get it sharpened, or both, like, you know, whatever really needs to be done. Biggest reasons for this is that, like, you know, if you actually have a super dried out base, your skis or your board are going to like really stick to the snow. It's not going to glide very well, especially if you kind of hit like a flat spot. It's just not going to like kind of smoothly get through that flat area. And if you have fairly dull or rounded edges, you know, you're not going to bite into the ground very well. Your skis or your board is going to be sliding all over the place. So just kind of like, you know, upkeep with that, so that way if you go on like an impromptu ski day or ski night, your stuff is like, you know, in relatively decent shape. So therefore it's going to perform a lot better on the hill. But there is one thing that you do have to take care of immediately, and that is if you actually get a core shot. Now, what I'm referring to as a core shot is that if you actually hit something below the snow surface, let it be like, you know, a tree or a rock, and you actually take a gouge out of the base of your skis or your board, exposing the wood or the core, hence core shot, what's going to happen here is that all that water from the snow will eventually start getting, you know, shoved into the core, and the core will eventually start to like absorb all of that water, making it waterlogged. And then once you actually get to that point, your stuff's pretty much toast. There's no way of getting back from that. You can't actually, you know, dry the core out. Once it actually gets to the point of no return, your stuff is essentially toast, and you have to go out and buy something new. So if you do get a core shot, make sure that you actually take care of that right away. What you're going to want to do is either take it into a shop, get it either patched or filled in properly. You know, spend the $50, $60, $100 now. So then that way in the long run, your stuff will actually last a lot longer, as opposed to you having to go out and spend, let's say, like $500, $600, $700 like on a brand new piece of gear. Now, as well, what you're gonna want to do is when it comes to your clothing, same thing, have like a general cleaning schedule for that stuff. The reason for this is that it will actually allow your stuff to perform better. If you want to check it out, I did a video on like the importance of essentially washing your gear. I'll just link it up here if you want to check that out. But yeah, pretty much what's going to happen there is it's going to allow your jacket to breathe, and it's going to allow all the snow or the water to beat off of the jacket, making your time a lot more comfortable on the hill. But as well, if you by chance have like, you know, a lower price point jacket, it's going to allow the membrane on the inside to kind of like, you know, stay together. It's not going to fall apart. So what I would highly suggest is like, you know, keep up with general maintenance now, spend like a little bit money here and there, as opposed to having to spend more money down the road just because like you haven't kept up with the maintenance on your stuff. All right, so I got a bonus tip for you, and it's going to be a little bit more obvious than the first 4 that I've given, and that is essentially keep your gear secure. You know, it's rather unfortunate that still to this day, there's still a lot of people out there that think it's okay to steal other people's property. So when you're actually up on the ski hill, I'd actually highly recommend that you actually lock your stuff up. There's pretty much like 2 major types of locks that you could buy. One of them is going to be like more of a coil lock, so you kind of like retract a cable, loop it through the rack itself, loop it through your gear, lock it up, and you set it with a combination. And then the other way that you can do is, in the way that I use, is actually buying a ski key. So the way that this works is you actually have to go to a specific rack, because what happens here is that you put your gear into the rack, this goes into it, and a little post comes through locking your gear in place. Now, These are pretty lightweight. They don't like jiggle around in your pocket. You don't really notice it that they're actually in your pocket while in a day of skiing. So I'd highly suggest that you actually go out, spend the 25-30 bucks on an actual lock, as opposed to having to go out and like, repurchase an entire kit after someone has, unfortunately taken yours. Another thing that I've heard of a lot is that like people's gear is actually being taken out of like their storage lockers, like in like their condos or their apartments. So one thing that I could suggest is that like keep your stuff like actually in your apartment. Now, if your place is pretty small, you don't really have a lot of place to to store it. There's a few things you can do. You could either hide it under your couch, hide it under your bed. At least in that way, like they're tucked and they're out of the way. Or what I've done in the past and still do to this day is that I actually put my stuff up on the wall. So, this is a little bit more for aesthetics, but, in previous places that I've lived, I've actually like put stuff up on a blank wall just because, it looked kind of cool. It like kind of filled up the space a little bit more. And the way that you can do this a few different ways. You could actually buy like little like hanging kits. They are a little expensive, so you have like multiple like boards or skis that tend to get a little bit pricey like really quickly. The two ways that I've done it is like previously I've kind of just gotten like racking shelves and drilled it into the walls, and then you display like your stuff kind of like shelves. Or in my current situation, what I've done here, I've actually used hockey pucks, very Canadian of me, to kind of help and put the boards and the skis like in a vertical position. And yes, I will eventually get to putting that one up. Been a little bit lazy with it, I guess, but it's just an easier way to display your stuff. It gives you more peace of mind in knowing that your stuff is actually like in your actual possession. It's in your own premises. It's not going to actually be like not necessarily in plain sight or an open sight, but it just kind of reduces the risk of people having to go in and taking your stuff from a storage locker. So that's it for me for today, everybody. Hopefully you got something out of this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It'd be greatly appreciated. Subscribe if you are not already. Don't forget to support your local ski and snowboard shop. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I'll see you guys in the next video.